Hey guys, tonight we're letting go of the glowing screens and late-night noise, and we're stepping gently into a world where time moved with the rhythm of the sun, and rest was something earned with bone-deep effort. We're going back to a life of aching hands and dirt-crusted clothes, where each breath you took was shared with the cold, and every morning meant another day of bending and lifting and sweating until the stars came out again. This is not a story of knights or kings. Tonight you're no one special. You're a field laborer in medieval Europe, and you're exhausted already. Before we begin, if you're finding comfort in these quiet stories, maybe give that like button a soft tap and consider subscribing, only if you truly enjoy the pace and peace of what we do here. I'd love it if you dropped a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. It always amazes me to see how far this little circle of stillness reaches. Now go ahead and lower the lights, maybe let a fan or some soft rain sounds play in the background, and allow yourself to drift. Tonight, your bed is made of straw, your hands are calloused, and your day begins at the sound of a bell. You wake up not to an alarm clock, but to the echo of a deep church bell, distant yet commanding, carried through the morning mist like a voice from the sky. It doesn't sing, it clangs, a slow metallic reminder that the day has begun, and your place in it is fixed. There's no snooze button here, just the quiet understanding that your absence in the fields means less bread, less favor, and possibly less life when winter circles round again. The first thing you feel is cold, not a sharp or shocking cold, but the slow, creeping kind that seeps through wool and skin and down into bone. You've slept, wrapped in a blanket that smells of sweat and damp earth, tucked into a corner of the cottage where the wind finds you anyway, slipping through cracks in the wall and stirring your hair as if to wake you itself. The straw beneath you is flattened and half mildewed. It's not a bed so much as a pause. You shift slightly, careful not to jostle the others, your younger brother curled at your feet, your father snoring softly on the other side of the hearth. Privacy is a myth here. Your life is shared, your sleep, your space, your air. All of it communal. The room smells like people and animals and old firewood. There's no separate barn. The chickens cluck quietly in a corner pen, and the goat, tethered loosely to a stake, shifts and sighs in her sleep. The floor is hard-packed dirt, a little damp from yesterday's storm. You pull your tunic over your head, the fabric rough against your skin. It's the same one you wore yesterday, and the day before, and probably every day for the last 2 seasons. You've mended it 3 times and will keep doing so until it falls apart completely. Laundry, like everything else, is done rarely and only with great effort. You move slowly because everything aches, not just your back, which feels like it's been twisted and reassembled with rocks instead of joints, but your hands, your shoulders, your legs. You're young, but your body already carries the weight of work that began years ago. Work that never ends. Your hands are dry, cracked and stained with the soil of the land you don't own but must serve. They smell faintly of onions and iron and something sour you've stopped identifying. You stretch them once, gently, and reach for the cloth satchel by the door. Inside, a bit of yesterday's crusty rye bread. A few bites of it will be your morning meal. It's hard enough to break teeth and chewy enough to silence complaints. There's no butter, no tea, no eggs, just bread, and maybe some lukewarm ale from the small clay jug your mother filled last night. Safer than water, though barely more pleasant. Your stomach tightens a little as you chew. Hunger is a regular companion, not the desperate kind that makes you claw at the pantry. There is no pantry, but the lingering, gnawing ache that you learn to ignore, like the buzzing of a fly or the clink of stones in your shoe. Food is a ration, not a pleasure. You eat quickly without ceremony while the others rouse in silence around you. No one talks much in the morning. Words are saved for need. Today, like most days, there's nothing new to say. Outside, the sky is a soft smear of grey. The sun is up, technically, but hidden behind a veil of low clouds and rising steam from the sodden earth. You step out into a puddle. The mud oozes between your toes. You wince, not from disgust, but from the cold. Your feet are bare, as they usually are unless your shoes, thin leather, worn at the seams, are dry enough to wear. Most days they're not worth the trouble. Better to go barefoot than to wear wet leather all morning and blister the skin you'll need for hauling and stomping. The tools lean against the side of the house. Wooden hoe, splintered rake, a basket for stones and weeds. You take them with practiced hands. There's no thought to it, just movement. The work itself will begin with tilling the furrows, loosening the soil, pulling out the rocks that winter pushed to the surface. Later, it will be sowing, watering, weeding, or harvesting. Each season has its rhythm. Each day has its burden. There's no clock. You measure time by the movement of the sun and the position of your own shadow, stretched out across the field. When you were younger, you tried counting the strokes of the bell or tracking the chicken's noise. Now you just feel the hours in your muscles. When your arms begin to throb, it's probably mid-morning. When your knees burn, you might be halfway through. When the hunger becomes sharp again, and the light begins to thin, you know it's almost over. Until tomorrow. You don't question it. This is what life is, what it's always been. Your father laboured in these
fields, his father before him. Your name might never be written in any book, and your grave, if you get one, might not last through the next frost. But you're here. You're doing what must be done, and while it sucks, while every part of it drains and wears and chips away at you, there's something quietly solid about it too. You belong to this earth, and it knows you. Your sweat feeds it. Your steps shape it. Your silence speaks for it. And so, as the first wave of labour begins, stone after stone, furrow after furrow, you bend your back to the task and take the first breath of work. The cold air fills your lungs, the mud clings to your feet, and somewhere in the distance, the bell tolls again. The first pull of the hoe through the half-frozen earth resounds more in your body than your ears. The sound is soft, muted by the dampness, but the jolt runs from your arms to your lower back like a memory. This is not the kind of work you ease into. It claims your muscles at once, without apology. Each stroke is a conversation with the land, and the land rarely answers kindly. The dirt is stubborn today. Waterlogged in places, stiff in others, it clings to the blade with wet defiance, refusing to break apart smoothly. You brace your heel against the handle and push harder, grinding the blade down. Your breath clouds in front of your face. You don't bother wiping the sweat already gathering on your brow. The wind takes care of that. The field is not large, but it stretches just enough to feel endless when you're alone with it. Rows marked by stone and habit, nothing more. You know every rock, every dip, every stubborn clump of grass that returns, no matter how many times you tear it out. There's a small rise toward the northern edge where the soil is thinner and lighter, and a depression to the east where water likes to collect, turning to muck that traps your ankles. You navigate all of it without thought. This knowledge isn't taught. It's grown inside you over years of walking and working and cursing under your breath when the spade snaps or the seeds drown in spring floods. There is no map of this field, but your body knows it the way it knows the shape of your own scars. You keep moving, not because you're driven or inspired or chasing anything. You move because to stop is to freeze, and to freeze is to fall behind, and to fall behind is to eat less when the wind turns cruel again. There are no second chances in this rhythm, no bonus harvest, just what you can coax from the ground with your own strength and whatever mercy the weather decides to give. You reach down, pick out another stone, and toss it toward the low wall that separates this land from the road. The pile there has grown slowly, year by year, a rough monument to your quiet persistence. No one praises you for it. No one ever will. But you add to it all the same. The sun is climbing slowly, its light thin and pale. It offers no warmth, only visibility. You can see the
other fields now dotted with figures like yourself. Heads bowed, backs hunched, tools flashing in uneven rhythm. There is no conversation. Not here. Not during this part of the day. Everyone is working, everyone is enduring. You see your cousin, a few furrows away, struggling with a wheelbarrow stuck in the mud. He curses quietly, glances up at you and then looks away. You don't need words. You both know the ache, the repetition, the long, silent hours that lie ahead. You both know there will be no rest until the bell calls again. You break for a moment, not because you want to, but because your grip is failing. Your fingers have begun to cramp from holding the handle too tightly. You lean on the hoe and stretch your spine gently, slowly, feeling every vertebra as it adjusts and resettles. The wind catches your tunic and sends a chill up your sides. You grit your teeth and reach for the small flask tucked in your belt. A sip of ale, bitter and flat, but it cuts the dryness in your throat. You swish it around your mouth, savoring the moment, then swallow and get back to it. The break is over before it begins. Time passes in patches. You measure it not in minutes but in distance. 3 more furrows, then the sun will be overhead, 5 more rows, and someone will bring out the midday gruel. The field doesn't mark time, it simply waits to be shaped, over and over again. Your arms are sore now, your shoulders heavy, your breath shorter than it was at sunrise. You notice the blisters forming under the old ones. Your palms are thick with callus, but still they split sometimes and the dirt gets in. It's a small pain, a manageable one, but it lingers, and when the day ends, it will hum in your skin long after your body has gone still again. The food comes late. Your mother walks across the field slowly, wrapped in her shawl, carrying a wooden bowl with both hands. She doesn't call to you, she simply stands near the edge, waiting. You finish the furrow before walking over. There's a dull respect in that. The work first, always the work. She offers the bowl without a word. Inside is something thick and beige, pottage again, mostly barley and onion this time, with a few flecks of carrot if your eyes aren't playing tricks on you. It's lukewarm, slightly sour from sitting too long by the hearth, but it goes down easily. You sit on a dry patch of stone and eat with your fingers. The wooden spoon was lost months ago and never replaced. The food fills your stomach, but not your spirit. It never does, but you eat it all, every last bite. Then you wipe your fingers on your tunic and stand. The rest of the day blends into motion, pulling, lifting, kneeling, stretching. A constant conversation between you and the earth. It resists and you reply, not with words, but with the steady pressure of your hands and the dull thud of your tools. The wind picks up in the afternoon, slicing through your tunic like a blade. You bow your head and keep going. The clouds roll in low and grey, threatening rain. If it falls, you'll keep working anyway. The fields don't wait for weather. At one point, your brother joins you, sent by your father to help gather stones. He's only 9, but his hands are already rough, his feet already stained with the same brown-black hue as yours. He doesn't complain, just follows your lead, watching how you bend, how you lift, how you choose which rocks are worth moving. You don't speak much, there's nothing to say. But it's a strange comfort, having him near. A reminder that this life is passed on not just through blood, but through motion, through repetition, through the slow wearing down of strength into skill. By the time the bell tolls again, the light has begun to fade, and your arms feel like sacks of grain barely strapped to your shoulders. You drag the last of the tools back toward the cottage, mud clinging to every inch of your legs. Your knees tremble a little as you walk, not from fear, but from the sheer repetition of standing and lifting and walking since dawn. You don't feel pride, just relief. One more day, done. One more patch of land closer to ready. One more quiet victory in a war that never ends. Inside, the fire is lit again. The air smells of smoke and cabbage. Your mother hums softly as she stirs the pot. Your father sits near the hearth, sharpening a sickle with slow, deliberate strokes. His sister combs her hair with a wooden fork, eyes half closed. No one talks much. The day has already been said with sweat and silence. You take your place near the wall, lean back, and exhale. Your fingers throb, your back pulses, but the room is warm, and the walls, though thin, hold the night at bay. For now, you don't sleep yet. You let your body settle first. Let the pain quiet to a dull whisper. Tomorrow will come too soon, with another bell, another field, another stretch of earth to tame with tired hands. But for now, for this one slow moment, you are still. The fire cracks once, loud and sudden in the otherwise muffled hush of the room, and for a moment, it's the only sound. The kind of silence that rests not in peace but in fatigue, shared among bodies too tired to lift their voices. You're seated now, legs folded beneath you, fingers curled loosely around a piece of rough bread that you're not even chewing anymore, just pressing against your tongue as if the effort of eating itself might break the fragile stillness of your body. It's not hunger you feel exactly, it's emptiness. Not painful, just deep. A hollow behind your ribs where food used to matter more than it does now, but you eat because the work has taught you that food is not a choice. It's part of the rhythm, part of the fuel, and even bad bread keeps you upright. Around you, the cottage breathes quietly. The smoke drifts up toward the darkened rafters, curling in lazy spirals, taking with it the smells of wood, onions, wool, and the faint acidic tang of iron from the tools still stacked by the door. The goat stirs and lets out a short, unbothered bleat, then falls quiet again. Your sister pulls her shawl closer, curls into a ball on the bench near the hearth, and you see the tips of her fingers twitch in sleep. One of the chickens clucks once from its corner, ruffling its feathers before tucking its head back down, and your mother moves through it all like a slow breeze, pouring what's left of the warm broth into thick clay cups and pressing one into your hands without a word. It's too salty, too thin, too familiar, but it's warm, and your hands, still stiff with chill and earth, welcome the heat, even if your stomach protests the repetition. You stare into the fire, not thinking, not planning, just watching the embers shift and sink and flare again. The orange light casts uneven shadows across the walls. You see the outline of your father's face, eyes half closed, head dipped forward slightly. His hands still rest on his knees, stained and scarred in a way that feels more like history than injury. You've watched those hands cut wheat and fix handles and wipe tears and bury dead things. They are not gentle hands, but they are steady. And in the silence, you realize how often you've copied them without noticing. The way he grips the hoe, the way he squints when checking the edge of a blade. The way he leans back not fully into rest, but into pause. Outside, the wind picks up, brushing against the walls of the cottage, like a hand testing for weakness. You hear it whistle softly at the edges, slipping through cracks, pushing at the corners of the roof, where the thatch has begun to thin. You pull your knees tighter, and the wool blanket closer around your shoulders, trying to trap whatever warmth is left. Nights like this, when the frost lingers and the clouds sit low, you remember what cold really means. Not the shock of it, but the persistence, the way it settles into your chest and your joints and stays long after the fire dies. Your thoughts wander, not far, but sideways, tracing the lines of the day behind you. The path you walked through the fields, the scrape of the hoe, the way your brother stumbled and caught himself with a grin too old for his face. You think of the stones you tossed and how your shoulder still aches from the bigger ones. You remember the moment you crouched beside the furrow and just sat for a breath longer than you should have, letting the mud creep up your calves because standing felt like an argument with gravity you couldn't win. It's not a remarkable life, but it is full of moments strung together by need. The need to eat, to sow, to harvest, to mend, to survive. And in those moments, sometimes there is a glimmer of something softer. A joke whispered while stacking hay. A quiet glance exchanged across the table that says more than words. A fire like this, burning just strong enough to make the night a little less cruel. You finish the broth slowly, savoring the heat more than the taste. Your hands relax slightly around the cup, your shoulders drop by degrees, and you feel the slow drift of sleep beginning to curl at the edge of your thoughts. But sleep doesn't come quickly. It never does, not with a body this sore. You stretch out on the floor near the hearth, careful not to disturb the others, and press your cheek into the sack of straw you call a pillow. It's flat and smells faintly of mildew, but it's yours. It has shaped itself to the bend of your neck over months of use. Familiar discomfort, better than new pain. You listen. The fire, the wind, the soft breathing of your family, all of it weaves together into a kind of lullaby, rough but rhythmic. You count the beats between the crackles of the fire. You listen to your own breath, slower now, deeper. You let your eyes fall shut, not because you're relaxed, but because staying awake takes more energy than you have left. Sleep comes like a fog, thick and slow, not restful, but real. And then, before your mind can fully drift, something stirs again. A memory, maybe, or a sensation. You're no longer quite sure where your thoughts end and your dreams begin, but you feel again the weight of the hoe in your hands, the stretch of your back as you leaned into the soil, the sting of cold air on sweat. It's all there, repeating itself, because tomorrow, and the day after that, and the week after that will be much the same, and that knowledge is not a comfort, but it is an anchor. You sleep because you must, because the bell will ring again, and when it does, you'll wake not to possibility, but to duty, to wait, to rhythm. But for now, you let the silence hold you. Let the aches fade to background hums. Let the firelight flicker behind your eyelids and dream, maybe, not of escape, but of ease. Just one day without stones, one day without frost in your shoes, one day where the earth says thank you instead of more. But even as you drift into that space between breath and stillness, your hands curl slightly, already remembering the shape of the tools, already preparing to grip and pull and dig again, because this is who you are. Not a farmer, not even a peasant, just a pair of tired hands in a long line of tired hands, feeding a field that never fills, waiting for a harvest that barely holds you through the next winter. You are part of the land, and the land does not rest, and still you sleep. As you wake not with a start, but a sigh, a slow return to the ache of consciousness. There is no alarm, no voice, no change in the light, just the weight of your own body reminding you it still exists, stiff and sore, and somehow older than it was when you closed your eyes. The air is heavy with the scent of old wood smoke and damp wool. The fire has long since burned down to ash, and the cold has crept back in, curling itself around your ankles and settling into your joints like a familiar complaint. You open your eyes and see nothing at first. Just the dark, grey hush of early morning pressing in through the chinks in the walls. Somewhere outside, a rooster calls once and then falls silent, as if even it lacks the strength to announce the day. You lie there for a moment, not moving. Not because you want to savour the warmth, there is none, but because you know what's waiting. The same field, the same stones, the same silent hours bent double, with the sun on your back and the dirt in your mouth. You know exactly how it will feel to stand, to lift, to begin again. And still you pull yourself upright, because not standing is not an option, not when the harvest depends on every row being turned, not when the stores in the shed are already running low, and it's only the edge of spring. You swing your legs over the side of the straw mat, plant your bare feet on the cold floor, and let out a low breath through clenched teeth. The first movement always hurts the most. Then it becomes background noise. The others are waking too. Your sister curls in tighter under the old cloak she uses as a blanket. Your brother rubs his eyes with fists like little stones and blinks blearily at the dim light. Your father is already up, squatting near the hearth, coaxing the last ember back to life with careful hands and the smallest bits of kindling. You hear your mother moving about with slow efficiency, her bare feet silent on the dirt, her face expressionless as she dips a ladle into the water bucket and sets a small pot to boil. No one speaks. Morning words are wasted breath when the day ahead is already so loud with demands. You reach for your tunic, the same one as always, the wool rough and scratchy even after months of wear. It clings to your skin with the memory of sweat and labour, its sleeves permanently shaped by the bend of your arms. You slip it on without thinking, without noticing the small new tear at the hem or the patch your mother stitched near the collar 2 weeks ago. There is no wardrobe, no rotation, no change. Clothes are worn until they give out, then repurposed into rags, then into stuffing for pillows, then burned if they still don't disintegrate on their own. The cloth wraps around you like a second skin, and already you begin to feel its weight, not in fabric, but in familiarity. Breakfast, if it can be called that, is the same lukewarm mash of barley and cabbage that you had last night, now congealed slightly from the chill. You eat it with a flat wooden spoon, the bowl balanced on your knees. It tastes like effort. The salt is nearly gone from the household, so the flavour is dull and earthy, more texture than taste. But it fills the hollowness in your stomach just enough to give you the illusion of energy. You chew slowly, not from savouring, but because the motion helps your jaw wake up. When you're done, you hand the bowl to your sister without a word. She scrapes out the last of it with her fingers and licks them clean before setting it aside. By the time you step outside, the sun is just beginning to claw its way over the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of dull gold and pewter. The mist is thick on the fields, curling low around the dirt like it's trying to protect it from what's coming. You don't stop to admire it. Beauty is not a thing you look for. It just happens sometimes quietly while you're moving through your work. You collect your tools from where they rest against the cottage wall, stiff with mud and cold from the night air. The hose handle is splitting again near the base, and you make a mental note to ask your father to wrap it with twine. It's a small repair. Not urgent, but small things turn into big things if left too long, and broken tools slow the work. You head back into the fields, the mud pulling at your feet with every step. Your boots are damp and beginning to lose their soles. You feel every pebble through them, every twist of root beneath the surface. The The ground is softer today, wet from the rain that came in the night, which will make turning it both easier and messier. You brace your body, plant your feet, and begin again. The blade digs into the soil with a low thud, and your arms absorb the shock. You pull, lift, shift, and reset. The pattern is familiar, almost comforting in its repetition. Your mind begins to drift as your body falls into rhythm. You think about the stories you were told when you were younger. Tales of saints and miracles, of men who spoke to animals and women who healed with a touch. You think about the wandering friar who came through last autumn with a face like leather and hands that trembled from some unseen wound. He told you that suffering brought you closer to God, that each blister and bruise was a prayer in the making. You remember looking at him and wondering if he believed it or just needed you to. Either way, you didn't argue. You just nodded and went back to your work. Because fields don't care about theology. They only answer to seed and sweat. Mid-morning comes slowly, carried on the wings of fatigue. Your shoulders have begun to ache. Your fingers cramp around the handle, and your legs feel heavy, not with pain exactly, but with the certainty that they will not be given rest. You pause only when your mother waves a cloth from the cottage, signaling that it's time to eat again. You trudge back, each step a little slower, the pull of exhaustion a little deeper. At the threshold, your brother hands you a hunk of bread and a cup of ale. You take both, not because they offer pleasure, but because they offer fuel. The bread is coarse, heavy with bran, and dotted with bits of something you hope is barley and not grit. The ale is flat and bitter but clean. It helps wash down the dryness in your throat and the crumbs from your mouth. You lean against the wall, chewing mechanically, letting your eyes drift across the field. It looks no different than it did this morning. No sign of progress. No measure of success, just furrows and footprints and more to do. You don't speak, neither does your brother, but you notice he's limping slightly, favoring one leg. You make another quiet note to trade tasks with him tomorrow. Let him haul weeds while you dig. It's a small kindness and he won't say thank you, but he'll remember. The bell rings faintly from the church tower beyond the trees, and the rest of the village stirs like a nest of insects. You see other figures in the distance, bending, lifting, carrying, all of you tethered to the same rhythm, all of you moving not toward wealth or glory or reward, but simply survival. You push off the wall, dust the crumbs from your tunic, and walk back to your place in the dirt. There's still a full day ahead, still rows to till and rocks to move and weeds to burn, still aches to endure and fingers to split and backs to bow, still more of the same. And yet you keep going, not because there's anything waiting at the end of it, but because this is what you do, what your parents did, what your children will do. The land asks for everything and you give it, because it's the only way you know how to live. The field doesn't look any different now than it did at dawn. You've been working it since the first light smeared its way across the treetops, and still, the furrows ahead stretch out like the folds of an old ragged blanket. There is no visible reward for what you've done so far. No neat row of accomplishments or ticking clock to measure your output. Just earth turned slightly more than it was yesterday, and a dull ache blooming steadily in your arms and lower back. You keep your head down, not to block out the view, but because lifting it offers nothing new. The sky is still overcast, thick with pale clouds that press down like damp wool. The wind has quieted some, but there's a chill in the air that never quite leaves, the kind that seems to settle behind your ribs and stay there, just out of reach. Your hands are coated in a layer of cold mud, thick and cracked in places where your skin has split from the friction of the hose handle. There are slivers under your nails and bits of straw clinging to your sleeves. You've stopped noticing these things. They are just a part of you now, as familiar as the steady rhythm of your breath and the soreness that loops around your shoulders. Every movement is slow, deliberate, never wasted. There is no room for sudden bursts of energy or wild efficiency. That's not how this kind of labor works. It's not about speed. It's about not stopping. You glance up briefly and see your father working a few furrows away, his movements slower than they were last spring. He was once the strongest man you knew, the one who could lift twice what you could without so much as a grunt. Now you see the way his left knee folds slightly inward when he turns, the way he takes more breaks between loads. You wonder if he notices it or just refuses to admit it. He hasn't said anything, he wouldn't, but he's shifting more of the heavier work your way bit by bit, like passing a torch without ceremony. You feel it, and you don't resent it, not really, because you know one day you'll do the same to your younger brother if you live long enough. It's not a burden, it's just what happens. The day continues its slow crawl. You measure time by the change in light, by the way your body begins to tremble a little after each haul, and by the shadow that grows beneath your feet and stretches eastward. Lunch came and went without much fuss. A thin soup that tasted mostly of boiled cabbage and whatever bones were left from last week's stew. You ate it while squatting against a stump, boots off, flexing your toes and willing away the numbness. Wasn't enough to fill you, but it took the edge off the hunger, and that was all anyone expected. Now in the late afternoon there's a stillness creeping over the land. Not quiet exactly, because the world is always making sound. Birds chirp sharply overhead. A dog barks from the edge of the village. Far off someone calls out to a child. But it's a muted stillness, a softening of everything, as though the earth itself has grown weary and is settling down to rest before the last stretch of daylight. You find yourself leaning on the hoe a little longer between furrows, letting your breath steady, letting your muscles go slack for a moment before willing them back to work. Your thoughts wander during these moments. They usually do when your body is too tired to fight them. You think about the seasons ahead, the planting that must still be finished before the rains grow heavy, the repairs needed on the fence that surrounds the small garden your mother keeps, the slow creeping rot in the beams of the cottage roof. There is always more to do than time allows, and always more needs than your hands can meet. You push those thoughts aside, they can wait. Right now, the furrow in front of you demands your attention. You grip the hoe again and keep going. Your younger brother appears near dusk, carrying a small sack of seed. His face is smudged with dirt and something darker, likely soot from the fire he was tending earlier. He doesn't say anything as he approaches. He just nods, sets down the sack, and begins to work beside you. His movements are awkward, his rhythm uneven. He's still learning, still growing into the demands of the field. You don't correct him. He'll learn more from doing than from being told. Besides, your throat is too dry for instruction. The two of you work in tandem, a quiet rhythm of effort and movement. Occasionally your shoulders brush as you turn, and in those brief touches you feel a kind of wordless bond, a shared understanding that doesn't need to be spoken. This is how he will learn. This is how he will remember, not through stories, but through the weight of the hoe and the chill of the wind and the grit under his nails. These are the things that will shape him. By the time the last furrow is finished, the sun is bleeding red across the sky, sinking behind the trees like a tired god, retreating to its bed. You and your brother stand there for a moment, leaning on your tools, breathing heavily. There's no celebration, no sense of victory, just the knowledge that the day is over and you are still standing. That is enough. You gather your tools and begin the walk back to the cottage. Your legs feel like hollow logs, each step an act of will. Your brother trails behind you, dragging the sack of seed with both hands. At home, the fire is already lit, and the warmth hits you like a blessing. The smell of stew hangs in the air, thicker than usual, and for the first time in days, your stomach growls with something close to urgency. You set the tools against the wall, wipe your hands on your tunic, and sink down near the hearth. Your mother hands you a bowl, and you accept it gratefully, cupping it with both hands and letting the heat seep into your skin. The broth is richer tonight, seasoned with bits of smoked meat that must have been saved for something. Maybe someone traded for them, or maybe your father made a good deal with the tanner. You don't ask, you just eat. The room is quiet except for the sounds of eating and the occasional crack of the fire. Outside, the wind has picked up again, rattling the shutters and whispering through the thatch, but inside there's a sense of safety, not comfort exactly, but protection. A small pocket of warmth against the cold weight of the world. You finish your stew, lick the spoon clean, and set the bowl aside. Then you pull your blanket tighter and ease your body down onto the straw mat by the fire. Every muscle protests, every joint complains. But the warmth of the fire dulls the sharp edges of the pain, and your eyelids begin to sag. You lie there, listening to the sound of your brother's breathing, the soft murmur of your mother's voice as she hums to herself, the quiet scrape of your father, sharpening a blade for tomorrow's work. And you feel the weight of the day settle over you like a second blanket. Heavy, familiar, complete. The fire has dimmed, its glow softening to a low amber pulse that flickers across the beams of the ceiling like slow-moving breath. You lie still on the straw mat, your body halfway between sleep and stiffness. The air around you is thick with the scent of boiled herbs and sweat-damp wool, and the faint crackling of embers makes the only sound. It's not exactly quiet, not in the way forests are quiet, or caves or temples, but it's the kind of silence that grows in rooms where people are too tired to speak. A silence born not from absence, but from presence, stretched thin. Your limbs feel too long, as if they've grown heavier than your frame can support, and your chest rises and falls in a rhythm that's not quite restful, but steady. You hear your mother shift nearby, the creak of the wooden bench beneath her and the faint sound of her fingers working at a piece of cloth. She's mending something even now, even in the dim firelight, and after a full day of managing the hearth and patching up the younger ones. Her work never really ends either. It's just quieter, more often unseen. You used to think your father worked harder because he sweated more and cursed out loud when the blade broke or the cows wandered off. But now, watching your mother rock slowly by the fire, you're not so sure. Her hands don't stop, not even in sleep. She sews in her dreams. You've heard her whisper patterns in the dark. Your brother snores gently behind you, tucked under an old woven blanket that smells like hay and ash. He had a fever last winter that left him smaller somehow, not just in body, but in presence. He smiles less, speaks less, but he still follows you into the fields without complaint, and today, for the first time, he finished his row before you did. You noticed? You didn't say anything, but you let him see that you saw. That's how things are spoken here, not with words, but with glances, with space, with the way someone fills your cup without being asked. Outside, the wind has slowed to a whisper, brushing against the shutters like a hand that can't quite let go. You hear the trees creak in the dark and the distant hoot of an owl hidden somewhere in the hedgerow. There's a kind of peace in the night sounds. They remind you that the world continues even while you lie here, unable to move from the weight of the day. That somewhere out there, foxes hunt and badgers shuffle through the undergrowth, and small streams babble beneath sheets of ice. The earth breathes too, and in that thought you feel strangely less alone. You roll slightly onto your side, wincing as your shoulder protests. The straw is lumpy beneath you, and your tunic has twisted up your back, exposing a patch of skin to the cool air. You don't bother adjusting it. The discomfort is minor compared to the tired hum in your knees and the hot pulse behind your eyes. You let your head rest on your folded arm and watch the fire, not for warmth or light, but because it gives your mind something to do. The flames dance slowly now, casting long shadows that stretch and contract with each new shift in the logs. You imagine faces in them sometimes, not spirits or saints, but people like you, older maybe. Gone now, watching. Sleep comes in waves, it tugs at you, then releases. It's a strange thing, sleep after work like this. It's not soothing, not gentle. It's a kind of shutting down, like someone slowly dimming all the lamps in a castle until only the faintest glimmer remains. You don't drift, you collapse. But tonight, your mind lingers, caught on a memory that floats to the surface without warning. You're younger, maybe 7, maybe 8, walking behind your father along the edge of a frozen field. The sky is sharp blue and the ground crackles beneath your boots. He's pointing out the lines in the soil, showing you how the frost reveals the softest spots, how to test them with your heel. He doesn't say much, just grunts and gestures. But you understand. You follow the print of his feet and try to match the depth. He turns once and looks at you, and in that glance is everything: approval, expectation, a kind of quiet pride that he'll never speak aloud. You remember that more than anything, not the lesson, but the look. You shift again, finally pulling the blanket up over your exposed shoulder. It's coarse and a little damp at the corners, but it's heavy, and that's enough. The weight of it is oddly comforting, like the hand of someone who means well, even when they say nothing. You feel your breath slow. Your heartbeat fade into the background. Your thoughts begin to unravel, drifting from memory to dream to nothing at all. And just before you let go completely, you hear your mother's voice. She's humming now, barely audible, a lullaby so old you don't remember the words. She used to sing it to you when you were small, when your legs ached from growing and the wind scared you. It's not meant to soothe anymore, but still it does. The melody is uneven, shaped by the rhythm of her stitching, and you find yourself breathing in time with it. You don't think, you just feel the warmth of the fire, the presence of family, the softness of a song meant for no one in particular. You close your eyes, and for a little while you forget the field, the stones, the aching pull of obligation. You are just a body wrapped in cloth, surrounded by the sound of those you love, held briefly in the arms of something kind. The darkness thins before the light arrives. You don't open your eyes right away. You don't need to. Your body tells you what the sky will soon confirm. Morning is on its way. The air has changed, less heavy, still cold, but with that subtle lift that comes just before the birds stir and the fire gets stoked again. Your bones feel it first, in the way your hips press into the uneven floor, in the slight twitch of your toes under the blanket, in the way your breath leaves your chest with more weight than warmth. There is a heaviness inside you that isn't quite sleep and isn't quite exhaustion. It is the weight of knowing what comes next. You lie still, hoping that if you just remain motionless long enough, the day will pass you by. But of course it doesn't. The soft cluck of a chicken stirs the quiet. Then the faint scrape of your father's boots on packed dirt. The fire pops as it catches the sliver of kindling he laid out the night before. The room grows warmer by degrees, not much, just enough to stir the goat in the corner and coax your mother from her curled sleep into her quiet, daily ritual. You smell the beginnings of a porridge, thin and familiar, cooked not because anyone wants it, but because something warm must go into the belly before the work begins again. Your eyes open slowly. There is no sunrise here, no dramatic burst of colour across the landscape. Just a slow grey unveiling, light creeping in around the edges of the shutters, catching the corners of the ceiling, brushing gently across your brother's sleeping form beside you. He's on his side, curled like a fern, his mouth slightly open, and one foot kicked free from the blanket. His face looks younger when he sleeps, softer, as though the day hasn't yet had time to carve its usual lines of worry into his brow. You sit up gradually, first pushing yourself onto one elbow, then letting your spine stretch itself back into alignment. It doesn't happen easily. Your body resists the return to movement. Your shoulders ache from where you strained them yesterday, lifting a rock too large to move alone. Your thighs feel like they've been packed with sand. You run your hands through your hair and feel the dust fall out in tiny flecks. There's no mirror in the house, but you know what you look like. Eyes rimmed with sleep and dirt, cheeks windburned, lips cracked. You could wash if the water barrel outside wasn't crusted with a thin sheet of ice. The cold bites sharply as you push the door open. You step outside, barefoot, careful to place each foot where the frost looks thinnest. The mud is frozen, stiff under your soles, and your breath clouds the air in front of you. The sky above is blank and low, a ceiling of soft grey. You stare at it for a moment and feel small in a way that doesn't frighten you, just confirms what you already know. You are not the center of anything. You are not special. You are one of many, each day lived beneath the same sky, each task repeated in countless villages, in countless fields. This life is yours, but it is also everyone's. You dip your hands into the freezing water of the barrel, splash your face and hiss under your breath. The cold sears you awake. There is no gentleness in the start of the day, no transition, just plunge and adapt. You dry your hands on your tunic and head back inside. Your mother hands you a cup of hot porridge without looking up. Her hands are already turning another patch of cloth, her fingers stiff from the chill and still moving with careful precision. You eat slowly. The porridge is barely sweetened, thickened only with a pinch of leftover oats and a bit of mashed turnip. It tastes of ash from the fire and something bitter you don't try to name. But it's hot, and that is enough. No one speaks much. The children are half asleep still, moving through their preparations like sleepwalkers. Your father is sharpening the hoe again, checking the rope bindings at the edge of the handle. Your sister pulls on her apron, the one with the stitched corner she repaired with thread she'd bartered for with eggs. It's fraying again. She frowns but says nothing. This is how things wear down, slowly, quietly, and without asking. Soon you are out in the field again. Your boots crunch through the frost as you take your place near the northern edge. The sun has not yet made an appearance, and the clouds offer no promise that it will. Your breath fogs out in slow bursts as you lean into the first stroke of the hoe. The motion is stiff at first, your arms complaining with every tug. But like always, your muscles begin to settle into it, finding the groove, remembering the rhythm they have known since you were barely tall enough to reach the handle properly. The soil, half-thawed and heavy, gives with reluctance. By mid-morning, the sky lightens slightly, not blue, but a softer grey. You shed your outer cloak and drape it over a fence post, too warm now from labor to keep it on. Your tunic sticks to your back with sweat, and you pause briefly to wipe your brow. You catch sight of your brother a few rows down, pulling weeds and tossing them into a basket slung across his hip. He moves slowly but with purpose, his shoulders hunched, his head down. You think of calling to him, but the moment passes. Instead, you offer him a glance when he looks up, and he nods once. It's enough. There are no stories to share, just dirt. As the sun peaks, though it remains hidden, you take your break. Your mother brings out a small cloth-wrapped bundle, inside of which are 3 coarse rolls and a single small wedge of hard cheese. You split them among yourselves, careful to leave enough for later. You chew slowly, feeling the fatigue settle into your muscles, not like a crash, but a reminder. The kind of tiredness that doesn't lift, only shifts from one limb to another. You sit on a stone near the edge of the field and stare at your boots. The stitching is beginning to pull away near the toe. You'll have to mend them soon, if the leather can take another hole. The afternoon passes in a blur of repeated motion. The work is the same, always the same. Hoe, lift, scatter, kneel, pull. The field doesn't change, only you do. You notice your hands shaking a bit now when you pause too long. Your thighs tremble as you straighten. You keep moving. Because stillness is not rest. It is a delay. And you cannot afford delay. There is too much field, too little time. Always. By the time you return home, the sky has begun to darken again. The clouds hang low, tinged faintly with lavender and blue. Your arms barely function. Your fingers no longer feel like part of you. Inside, the warmth is a balm, not enough to soothe, but enough to soften. You sink to the ground by the hearth without waiting. Your sister hands you a bowl. You take it wordlessly. The stew is thicker tonight, with bits of something savory swimming in it. Perhaps a bit of leftover meat. You don't ask. You eat. Slowly, gratefully. Later, after the bowls are rinsed, after the tools are checked, after the animals are fed, and the fire stoked once more, you find your place on the mat and lie back. Your body groans in protest. But the blanket is warm from the fire, and your breath begins to slow. You let your eyes close. Outside, the wind begins again. It brushes past the shutters and rustles the bare branches of the trees. You hear it and feel no fear. It is the sound of the world continuing, uncaring, unending. You nestle deeper into your blanket, feel the scratch of the straw beneath your shoulder, and let the dark take you. When you rise the next morning, it is not from rest but from habit. The aches have not gone anywhere. They've only shifted shape during the night, curled tighter into your joints and stiffened the small places between bones. The straw mat beneath you feels damp again, and you wonder if it rained while you slept, or if it's just the breath of too many sleepers pressed into too small a space. You push yourself upright slowly, catching the edge of your blanket before it slips fully to the floor, and sit for a moment in the quiet. The fire is no more than a glow, a red eye watching the last of the night fade into pale morning. Your mother is already awake, bent low beside the hearth, stirring something that smells faintly of root vegetables and ash. She doesn't speak when you rise. She rarely does in the morning. Neither of you needs words to navigate these early hours. You move around each other like stones in a stream, always near, never colliding. She hands you a cup of warm broth, more water than anything else, and you take it gratefully, wrapping your hands around the clay and letting its heat wake your fingers. The first few sips go down with a roughness that makes your throat ache, but it spreads warmth through your chest, and you lean into it without complaint. Today is different, not because the labor will be any less punishing or the meals any more filling, but because tonight, after the day's work, there will be a gathering in the village, a feast some call it, though that word feels too grand for what it really is. A shared meal, a few songs, maybe a story or two, told by the oldest man who still has enough teeth to be understood. It marks no grand occasion, just the changing of the moon, the start of the third planting week, or maybe just someone's decision that a little joy was overdue. Whatever the reason, it means the day will end in firelight, not from the hearth at home, but from the larger pit near the center of the village. And for that, your limbs find a sliver more energy. You work through the day with the same steady rhythm as always, but your mind drifts more than usual. As your hands dig and pull and scatter, your thoughts travel toward the memory of past gatherings. You remember last autumn when the harvest was lean but the cider was strong, and one of the shepherd boys danced a jig so wild he split the seam of his breeches. The laughter then had been real, the kind that bubbled up from somewhere deep, surprising everyone with its brightness. You remember how your sister sang, her voice untrained but full of something clean and unshaken, and how your father clapped just once and smiled for the first time in what felt like weeks. That night, you went to bed not warm or full, but lighter somehow. The work is easier with those memories whispering at the edges of your thoughts. The field still demands your full body, but it doesn't own your spirit. Not today. Even when the hoe slips in your grip and the mud clings too thick around your boots, you find the will to grin at your brother when he tumbles backward into a shallow trench. He glares, sputtering mud, then laughs, wiping his face with a sleeve already too filthy to make a difference. You help him up, your hands caked and stiff, and he mouths the word "tonight" with a wide-eyed grin. You nod, you both need this. By the time dusk begins to settle in and the air grows sharper, you've cleaned your tools and set them by the door. Your tunic, once dry, is damp with sweat and soil, and your legs feel like stumps carved from tired trees. Still, you wash your face in the basin, splash water under your arms, and comb your fingers through your hair. Your mother hands you a linen cloth she's been saving, rough but clean, and you drape it over your shoulders like it's something fine. Your sister has braided her hair and tied it with a bit of dyed thread, faded pink from too many washings. She looks different somehow, older maybe, or just more herself. Together, you walk into the heart of the village, following the wavering glow of firelight and the soft swell of voices. The path is uneven, familiar in the way your own hands are familiar, every rock, every bend, known by footfall rather than thought. The gathering place is already filling. Children chase each other between feet, ducking beneath benches and barrels. Elderly neighbors lean against the stone wall that marks the old well, wrapped in layers of wool and woven shawls. Someone has hung lanterns from a line of trees, their light flickering gently like stars afraid to shine too bright. The fire is large, its flames licking upward with a kind of wild joy. Someone is turning a spit, just a rabbit or two, nothing grand, but the smell is sharp and savory. The scent of bread singed at the edges drifts through the air, and bowls of root mash are passed from hand to hand, each portion meager but given freely. You take a bowl and sit on a low stool near the edge of the fire, your knees touching your brother's, your shoulder brushing your father's. Your mother sits close by, speaking quietly with another woman about something to do with seed grain and a late frost. The conversation is practical, but the tone is softer than usual, touched by the warmth of proximity and the rare promise of ease. Someone begins to play a flute, the tune light and lilting, lifting gently above the murmur of voices. Your sister claps her hands once, then again, and soon others join in, a slow rhythm that wraps around the fire like a thread. A few brave souls begin to dance, small shuffling steps at first, then bolder as the music swells. You don't
Dance. You never have, but you tap your foot against the dirt and let yourself smile when your brother gets pulled into the circle by a laughing girl with wild curls and a gap between her teeth. He stumbles at first, then finds his feet, and soon he's spinning awkwardly, his face flushed with more than firelight. Later, when the music fades and the food is mostly gone, the stories begin. Old Ben, whose beard reaches nearly to his waist, takes his place near the fire and lifts his voice. He tells a tale of a fox that tricked a priest and stole a holy relic, and another about a giant who could smell lies like smoke. The children lean in close, wide-eyed and open-mouthed. The adults chuckle in the low way of people who've heard the tale before, but still want to hear it again. You watch the flames dance in Ben's eyes and feel your own lids growing heavy. Eventually, the fire begins to die down, the embers glowing low and steady. People rise slowly, stretching, murmuring farewells. The spell of the night is not broken so much as folded carefully away, tucked into the creases of memory for another time. You walk home in silence with your family, your feet sore but light, your heart carrying something you can't quite name. Not joy, not exactly, but something like it. A warmth that lingers even as the cold night presses in again. Back home, you lay your body down on the straw mat, muscles still humming with the residue of movement and laughter. The fire is low again, the house quiet. Your mother hums a faint line of the flute's tune as she settles beneath her blanket. Your brother whispers something too soft to catch, then turns and goes still. You close your eyes, and for once you do not feel like a field. You feel like a person. Tired, yes. Sore, yes. But not invisible, not forgotten. Just someone who lived a day and lived it fully. The morning after the village gathering carries a strange kind of weight. Not heavier, not exactly, but different. Your body still aches, as it always does. The muscles in your thighs feel stretched and tight from the dancing, and your back complains the moment you try to rise. The mat beneath you is stiff, flattened from a night of deep sleep that for once held fewer dreams of stones and furrows. The fire is low again, just a memory of heat more than heat itself, and the cold nips at your skin as you sit up and blink against the pale light filtering in through the shutters. But still, something is different. There's a softness clinging to you, like the scent of smoke in your tunic, a trace of last night's joy folded into the rough texture of your daily rhythm. Your mother moves more slowly than usual this morning, and there's a faint trace of laughter in her voice as she gently wakes the little ones. Even your father, who rarely speaks before the sun is properly over the ridge, offers a low grunt that almost sounds like contentment as he pulls on his boots and checks the knife at his belt. Your
brother, curled still beneath the blanket, groans dramatically when he's shaken awake, burying his face in the crook of his arm before finally rising with a yawn that pulls every inch of his spine into a stretch. He looks older in the light today, more sure of himself, even with the mud still crusted at the hems of his breeches and a faint bruise where he collided with a dancing barrel the night before. Breakfast is simple again, leftover mash, thinned with water and stirred over the embers until it barely steams. But you eat it slowly, chewing with a kind of thoughtfulness that isn't about the taste. Your mind is full of firelight and flickering music, of the girl with the wild curls who spun around your brother, and the sound of old Ben's voice weaving impossible tales from smoke and memory. Those things don't last, not really, but they linger just enough to carry you into the next task with something more than sheer duty. It's not happiness. It's not even hope, quite. But it's close enough to make you stand a little straighter as you step back into the cold. The field hasn't changed, of course it hasn't. It stretches out before you with the same weary sprawl as it always does, each row a silent demand, each furrow an unanswered prayer. The ground is still half frozen near the edges and sticky with thaw in the middle, and the tools you lift feel as heavy as ever, but your hands move with less resistance today, and your mind, though fogged by sleep, feels a bit more yours than usual. You begin to work, slowly at first, reacquainting yourself with the weight of the hoe, the motion of lifting and turning, the way the soil breaks beneath the blade in clumps that smell faintly of damp roots and rot. You fall back into the rhythm, not gladly, but not begrudgingly either, just honestly, because it must be done. Your sister is down at the far end of the field today, collecting the last of the withered weeds to burn. She moves with a calm determination, her sleeves rolled high, and her braid tucked beneath a kerchief that's nearly lost its colour. Every now and then she pauses, stands straight, and rubs the back of her hand across her brow before returning to the task. You watch her from time to time, not because anything is different, but because it's comforting to know she's there, moving as you move, part of the same long cycle of labour and breath and silence. By midday, your arms have begun to ache again, the good kind of ache that comes not from injury, but from use. Your knees crackle when you kneel to inspect a patch of stubborn soil near the boundary stones, and you wince as you press your weight into the earth. You glance around and see that the others have slowed too, some sitting on upturned crates or leaning against low stone walls. Your father stands with his back to the wind, a strip of cloth pulled over his mouth, eyes narrowed at the cloud-thick sky. He doesn't say anything, but his gaze tells you he's watching for signs. The clouds are heavy with moisture, and if the rain comes early, the fields will be a mess for days. You eat a bit of bread from the pouch tied at your waist, chewing it slowly while your eyes wander across the landscape. The trees beyond the village shimmer faintly in the shifting light, their bare branches creaking like old bones in the breeze. There's a smell in the air now, rich and earthy, a scent that speaks of melting frost and hidden roots awakening beneath the surface. The land is waking up just a little, just enough to remind you that winter's grip is loosening, even if only for a while. The knowledge doesn't bring relief exactly, but it brings clarity. There is always another season, another set of tasks, another set of aches. The afternoon stretches on, the clouds never break, the wind stays sharp, your fingers begin to numb again, and your tunic is damp with sweat and mist. But you keep working, not out of pride, not even out of obligation, but because there's something sacred in the repetition, something honest in the way your hands shape the land, even if the land never thanks you. There's no applause at the end of a row, no reward when a rock is finally lifted from the soil after weeks of effort. But there is something in you that notes it, quietly, that remembers. When the day ends and the light fades once more, you gather your tools without ceremony and begin the walk back to the cottage. Your boots leave prints in the softened dirt, each step a small echo of everything you've carried today. Your brother is ahead of you, tossing a stick into the air and catching it, whistling something tuneless between his teeth. He seems lighter again, though his shoulders sag in that familiar way that says he'll sleep the moment his head touches straw. You feel the same. You are tired, but not broken. And that somehow feels like a victory. Inside, the fire is already lit and the warmth that greets you is a balm. Not enough to melt the cold that's settled in your bones, but enough to soften it. You remove your cloak and hang it near the hearth, stretch your fingers toward the flame, and exhale slowly. Your mother hands you a bowl of stew without speaking, and you take it, cradling it close like something fragile. The scent is comforting. Onion, carrot, a hint of whatever dried herbs she bartered from the peddler last week. You eat slowly, savoring each bite, not because it's delicious, but because it's earned. Later, as the fire burns low and your family settles into their corners, you lie back on your mat and listen to the sounds of the room. The soft creak of the beams in the ceiling, the rhythmic breath of your brother beside you, the low murmur of your father's voice as he speaks to your mother. Too quiet to catch the words, but calm enough to soothe. You close your eyes and feel the pull of sleep begin to gather. The fire's glow dances on the inside of your eyelids, and you think of the field again, of the way the soil gives, slowly, of the way a song sung around a fire can carry through into morning. You feel the ache in your arms like an old friend and welcome it, because this, all of it, is your life. And tonight, at least, it feels bearable, not easy, not soft, but real. And enough. The wind was stronger the next morning, and you felt it before you even opened your eyes. It curled through the tiny cracks in the wooden wall, threaded itself through the thatch above your head, and pressed its cold fingers against your cheeks as you blinked into the soft grey of another day. You didn't rise right away. Your body was reluctant, thick with the fatigue that didn't quite leave after a full night's sleep. The kind of tiredness that made your joints creak and your back groan just from shifting on the straw mat. Your limbs felt too long and too stiff all at once, as if you'd grown overnight, but the world hadn't noticed, and now you didn't quite fit inside your own skin. Still, you got up. You always got up. There was nothing else to do. The fire in the hearth had gone down to embers, and your mother was already crouched beside it, coaxing it back to life with patient movements and soft muttering. Your sister was lacing her boots by the door, her hair already braided, her eyes still heavy with sleep. She glanced at you and offered a brief, tired smile, then looked away. There wasn't much to say. The day would be what it would be, and you all knew it. Breakfast was thinner than usual, the mash watered down to stretch it another day. You sipped it slowly, wrapping your hands around the clay bowl and letting its warmth sink into your fingers. It tasted mostly of smoke and old onion, but it was warm and it filled the space in your belly where hunger might have stirred. The table was quiet. Your father rubbed at his temples as he stared into the fire, not with pain, but with that deep, pensive stillness he sometimes fell into before the harder days. There had been talk of a storm coming. The sky had felt strange the day before, and now the wind seemed to carry warnings in its breath. You stepped out into the chill with your boots still damp from yesterday and your cloak pulled tight around your shoulders. The path to the field was familiar, but the air felt different. There was a hush to everything, the kind of pause the earth sometimes takes before it decides what to do next. The clouds hung low, heavy with the weight of something not yet ready to fall. The birds were quiet, and even the trees seemed reluctant to rustle too loudly. You walked with your head down, the wind tugging at your sleeves, your thoughts lingering not on the work ahead, but on the memory of your mother's hands smoothing the wrinkles from your cloak before you left. The soil was stiff beneath your boots, not frozen, but not quite soft either. The kind of ground that resisted you, forced you to press harder with every motion. You worked more slowly that morning, not because you meant to, but because your body simply couldn't find the rhythm it needed. Every stroke of the hoe jarred your wrists and your knees ached each time you bent to clear debris from the furrows. Your brother worked nearby, silent and steady, his face set in a frown that never quite left these days. You wanted to speak, to say something small, something that might lighten the mood or remind him of the firelight and laughter still echoing from a few nights past. But the words never formed and the moment passed. Sometimes silence was just easier. Around midday, the wind picked up even more, sending little bursts of dust spiraling across the field and forcing you to squint against the grit. You tied your hood tighter and kept going, your eyes watering and your hands stiff. Lunch was brief and unsatisfying, just a crust of bread, hard enough to scrape the inside of your mouth if you weren't careful, and a bit of cheese, so dry it cracked when you bit into it. You didn't complain, none of you did. Complaining didn't change anything, it only made the work feel heavier. By the time the light began to dim again, you were coated in dust and soil, your hands numb, your legs shaking slightly each time you paused to stand upright. The walk back felt longer than usual, each step a quiet negotiation with your body. You passed the same worn fence posts and the same stones by the roadside, but they felt more distant somehow, as if the world had stretched a little in your absence. Your mind drifted to the warmth of the hearth, the sound of your sister humming to herself while she stirred the pot, the way your mother's fingers always brushed your sleeve when she handed you your bowl. Inside, the heat was waiting. Not much, just enough to soften the edge of the cold pressing against your skin. The fire crackled low and the stew tonight was thicker, a bit of barley and some scrap of salted pork you hadn't seen in a while. It smelled good, and you took your time eating it, letting each bite warm you from the inside out. No one spoke much, but there was a kind of peace in that. Not emptiness, but comfort. The kind that came from knowing you were surrounded by others who understood your silence. Later, as you lay on your mat with the fire's glow, painting your ceiling in soft flickers, you let your thoughts wander. You thought about the field, the weight of the tools, the ache in your fingers, but you also thought about your brother's hand, brushing yours as you passed him the last piece of bread, and the way your mother's voice softened when she said goodnight. These were small things, barely noticeable in the moment, but now, in the quiet, they felt like threads holding the fabric of your world together. Sleep came slowly that night, not because of pain or worry, but because your mind wouldn't quite settle. It moved in gentle circles, tracing the day's edges, holding on to the fleeting warmth of connection in a world built
on repetition. You shifted once, pulled your blanket higher, and let your breath grow slower. Outside, the wind howled softly against the shutters, a reminder that the world was wide and cold and never truly still. But inside, you were wrapped in something familiar, something real. And for now, that was enough. The next days came like they always did, quiet and grey, slipping into one another until the hours became hard to tell apart. You worked each morning with the same weary hands and the same slow movements, and though your limbs still ached, you began to notice how they responded faster now. Not easier, just more accustomed. The stiffness was still there when you woke, but it loosened more quickly, like a rope that had learned the familiar give and take of being pulled. The pain didn't go away, but your body knew how to carry it without stumbling quite as much. You didn't call it strength. That word didn't belong here. You just called it getting by. The field didn't change much, though you sometimes thought it did. A furrow that had once buckled under the hoe now seemed to open a little cleaner. A patch of soil you once cursed under your breath now gave way with a little less fight. Maybe it was the thaw working its way in from beneath. Maybe it was just that you'd finally memorized the pattern of the land under your feet. Or maybe it was you. You didn't ask for answers. You just kept digging, pulling, turning, repeating. Your brother grew quieter over those days. Not in a way that worried you at first, just in a way that made the air between you feel a little longer. He still worked, still fetched tools and tossed weeds into the heap, and took his bread without complaint. But the spark in his eyes seemed dimmer, especially in the mornings. You'd catch him staring off sometimes, down the slope toward the woods or up at the edge of the clouds, and you'd want to ask what he saw there. But you didn't. He was too old to be soothed and too young to be pressed. So you watched instead, and when you handed him your crust during the midday meal or let him rest an extra minute while you picked up the slack, you hoped he understood. One evening, just as the sky was slipping into dusk, he spoke without turning. You had been walking beside him in silence, your boots squelching in the soft earth near the path, when he said, almost too quietly to hear, that he missed the fire. At first you thought he meant the hearth back home, the familiar smell of smoke and stew and wool drying on the line. But then he said he meant the fire from the gathering, the one in the village, where the stories had danced higher than the flames themselves, the one where people had laughed without biting it back. You remembered it too, the way the light had made your sister's braid look golden, and the way your mother had clapped along to a tune as if she hadn't spent her whole day kneading dough and scrubbing cloth. You didn't answer him right away. What?
Was there to say? That kind of fire only came every so often, not because people didn't want it, but because they couldn't afford to stop long enough to keep it alive. Still, as the two of you stepped inside the cottage that night, greeted again by the scent of broth and the dull warmth of the stones, you thought about how even the memory of that fire seemed to warm your steps. Maybe that was enough to carry you for a little while longer. The nights were still long, and the wind still crept in through every crack, but the days were beginning to shift. The frost didn't bite quite as hard at dawn. The birds began to return, not in great flocks, but in twos and threes, chirping from the hedgerows in voices too high and sweet to match the grey landscape. Your sister picked a few buds from the edge of the field and placed them in a bowl of water near the window. They wilted within a day, but they made her smile while they lasted, and that seemed reason enough. Time didn't pass in weeks or seasons, not really. It passed in worn-out boots and hems grown too short and the slow fading of calluses into cracks. It passed in your father's beard, which grew whiter at the chin, and in the way your mother rubbed her wrists after grinding grain. It passed in the tone of your brother's voice when he asked if the sow had begun nesting, and in your sister's silence when the cheese went mouldy before it could be eaten. Nothing marked time like a clock. Time was in the wear of your clothes and the tilt of your spine, in the way a field filled with green, not all at once, but in patches, timid and unsure. You learned not to ask when the days would ease. No one had an answer for that. But sometimes, in the middle of work, when your hand gripped the hoe just right and the wind was behind you, you felt a kind of quiet satisfaction. Not joy, not relief, but a sense that the world was turning as it should, even if it turned slowly and with effort. And at night, when the fire was kind and the stew held just a little more meat than you expected, you felt something soft settle in your chest, like a blanket pulled just a little tighter around your shoulders. And with that you slept. Not with peace, but with something close to it. The days had begun to stretch a little longer, the light lingering past supper and softening the edges of the evening. You noticed it not in the sky first, but in the way the shadows played across the floorboards of the cottage, in the extra time it took for the orange hue to fade from your sister's braid as she sat by the window, twisting her thread. The season hadn't changed fully. The The mornings still cut your skin with their chill, and the breath you exhaled still clouded in the air. But something in the air had shifted, just enough to be felt in your bones rather than seen with your eyes. You were back in the field again, of course. There was nowhere else to be. The soil, a little softer now, yielded more easily beneath your hands. But that did not mean it welcomed you. The earth was never eager to give. It was stubborn, and it gave only what it must, asking in return the slow wear of your strength. Your boots stuck in the patches of early thaw, and the wind carried a wetness that clung to your skin. Still you worked because that was the rhythm of your life, and breaking it felt more dangerous than following it. But that afternoon, after you returned home, hands raw and knees caked with mud, your mother asked you to stay inside instead of helping with the animals. Her voice was calm but firm, and you felt something shift inside you at the request. It wasn't often that the routine bent for anything. So you sat, cross-legged on the floor near the hearth, while she brought out the worn tunics from the chest. She set a small basket beside you, filled with thread and needles, scraps of cloth that had once belonged to garments, long since turned to rags. She didn't explain, she didn't need to. She sat beside you, not speaking, just working. Her hands moved slowly, stiff from years of kneading and scrubbing, but still sure. You watched her mend a tear in one of your brother's sleeves, the needle sliding through the fabric like it knew the path already. You had never truly noticed how quiet sewing was, how gentle the world became, when the only sounds were the soft hiss of thread being pulled tight and the occasional breath as someone leaned closer to inspect a seam. You took one of your father's shirts, the one with the fraying collar, and tried your hand at stitching. Your first few passes were clumsy, the needle snagging or sliding off course, but your mother said nothing, just continued her own work, her presence steady beside you. It was the first time in days your hands had done something that didn't involve dirt, the first time you'd held something in your fingers that didn't weigh more than it should. As the stitches began to align, rough but firm, you felt something ease inside your chest. Not pride exactly, not even peace. Just the faint reminder that not all labor had to be hard. Some of it could be gentle, quiet, and still leave something behind that was better than it had been before. Your sister joined you after finishing her chores, pulling out a half-unraveled sock she had been trying to rework. She didn't speak either, just settled beside you, and soon the three of you sat in the flickering firelight, each working your small miracle with thread and cloth. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the walls of the house with its usual hunger, but inside, the air was still. Software, warm. Your father returned just before the light faded completely, stamping his boots on the threshold and brushing hay from his shoulders. He saw the circle you formed around the mending and paused in the doorway for a moment longer than usual. You didn't turn, you just kept stitching, but you felt the heat of his gaze, not judging, just watching. Eventually, he stepped inside and sat down with a sigh, the kind that held not just exhaustion, but something else, something closer to relief. That night, supper was later than usual, but no one minded. The stew had simmered longer and its flavor was deeper, richer, as though it had been waiting to be noticed. Your mother had added a bit of dried herb she rarely used, and it clung to your tongue in a way that made you close your eyes for a moment while you chewed. No one spoke. The silence was not empty, but full of small meanings. Thread passed hand to hand, sleeves patched and folded, a flicker of shared labor that didn't hurt. When you finally lay down to sleep, the mat felt softer beneath you. not because it had changed, but because your body had. It had done something else today, something that reminded you of another way to move through the world. Your fingers still ached, but it was a different kind of ache, one that hummed rather than throbbed. You curled your hands beneath your cheek and breathed in the scent of smoke and wool, letting your thoughts drift. You thought about the stitches you had made. They weren't perfect. The thread wasn't even, but they held. They turned something torn into something useful again. That was what your days were made of, really. Not victories or revelations, just little repairs, quiet fixes, small things that, when done enough times, became a kind of life. Outside, the wind sighed once more and moved on. Inside, your breath slowed. And in the darkness, you let go. Not of everything, just enough. There were mornings when the weight inside your body felt older than your years. You couldn't always tell if it came from the endless pull of tools against the same stubborn ground, or from the silence that often lingered between the ones you loved. It wasn't an angry silence, not an empty one either. It was just a silence filled with knowing. The kind that settled into corners and hovered over breakfast bowls and rested in the tired curve of your brother's shoulders as he hunched near the fire, rubbing warmth into his hands. Lately, he had begun to move differently. You noticed it first in the way he hesitated before standing, as if the choice to rise needed more effort than it once did. Then in the way his eyes no longer followed the sky, but stayed fixed low, watching the dirt, watching his own boots as if they might tell him something the world had forgotten to say. He still worked, still shouldered the same tools, still followed the same furrows, and met your gaze when needed. But something inside him had gone quiet, and you carried that quiet with you every time you stepped into the field. One morning, the frost returned more stubbornly than expected. The thaw had been teasing you, softening the ground just enough to plant the hope of spring, and now the frost had come back, as if to punish that hope. Your fingers stung when you touched the metal of the hoe, and your breath came out in sharp puffs that vanished before they reached your brother. He stood at the edge of the plot, his back turned to you, his figure slightly bowed. You paused before joining him, just watching, your heart tugging in that strange, tired way that didn't know what to do with care. You worked side by side most of the morning. Words were scarce. Only the wind spoke clearly. It whispered through the grass, curled around your ears, and pushed clouds across the sky with a kind of grim determination. Your brother's movements were slower, less coordinated, as though something inside him had loosened and wasn't holding together the way it used to. At midday, when your mother brought out the sack of coarse bread and dried turnip slices, he barely touched his share. He sat on the low stone near the edge of the field and chewed without tasting. You watched his jaw move and wondered what it was like to feel so hollow and still keep going. Later that evening, while the sun melted low and golden into the distant trees, he spoke again. It was the first real sentence he'd offered in days. He asked you if you remembered the old trail beyond the wood line, the one that curved toward the stream, with the flat stones where you used to hop across like goats when you were little. You said yes, of course you remembered. It had been your summer world once, that narrow path surrounded by tall grass and buzzing life. You could still hear the gurgle of the water, still see the way the sun caught the wings of dragonflies hovering near the reeds. He nodded but didn't smile. He just said he missed it. That night, long after the fire had dimmed and the cottage had gone still, you lay awake listening to his breath. It wasn't restless, but it wasn't calm either. It came in fits, little starts and stops, like someone trying to find their way in the dark without bumping into anything too loud. You thought about reaching out, laying a hand on his shoulder like you used to when you were small, and storms made the roof creak too loudly, but you didn't. You just lay there listening, sharing the dark. Over the next few days, the weather softened again. The mornings remained cold, but by midday, you could feel the light lingering longer on your skin, and the wind no longer carried the sting of ice. The fields began to breathe a little easier. The soil released its hold on the last frost and began to yield more willingly beneath your tools. You found yourself humming once or twice, low and tuneless, but enough to carry rhythm to your arms. And once, just once, you caught your brother watching you while you worked. Not with a frown, not with fatigue, just watching, his eyes following the pattern of your hands, as if trying to remember something. One evening, after chores were done and the fire was beginning to dance low again, he asked if you still knew how to find that old path. You looked up from your bowl and saw something in his face that hadn't been there in weeks. A kind of searching. You nodded, slowly, then said you'd walk with him there when the work allowed. His shoulders dropped just slightly, a breath he didn't know he was holding, letting go. That night, you slept easier. Not because your body hurt any less, or because the world had suddenly grown kind, but because a thread that had frayed between you was now gently pulled taut again. It didn't fix anything. It didn't change the grind of the days or the dull hunger in your belly, but it held. And in a life where so much slipped through your hands, that was something worth keeping. The work didn't pause for many things, but there were rare moments when it bent. Not completely, not like some tale where labor stopped and joy took its place, but just enough to allow something different to unfold in its narrow cracks. And on that mild spring afternoon, when the sun hung low in a sky that had shaken off its grey for just a while, the moment bent long enough for you and your brother to slip free. You'd finished the tasks quickly, more quickly than usual, your hands moving with a quiet urgency that your mother noticed but didn't question. She handed you a folded cloth with a corner of bread and a sliver of cheese inside, and only nodded when your brother took his cloak from the peg and slung it over his shoulder without a word. You both stepped into the light like boys again, not fully, but enough to feel it tickle something in you that had been asleep for too long. The path was still there, just as your feet remembered it. The curve at the base of the field where the nettles grew tall. The narrow break in the brush where your father once strung a piece of wool to mark the way. The trail had thinned with disuse, but it had not disappeared. Your boots found the old rhythm naturally, stepping over roots and ducking beneath branches without thinking. The air felt different in the woods, damper and more fragrant, filled with the scent of damp moss, bark, and the faint sweetness of early blooms. Your brother said nothing at first, and neither did you. There was comfort in the quiet, in the sound of birds fussing high above you, in the trickle of unseen water winding its way through the undergrowth. When the trees opened up and the little stream came into view, it was like exhaling after holding your breath all winter. The water moved lazily over the rocks, a soft murmur that reached into your chest and loosened something you hadn't realized was tight. The flat stones were still there, though some had shifted in the floods that came and went each year. A few were moss-covered, slick with age and memory, but others remained dry and sun-warmed. You stepped onto one carefully, then another, balancing with ease born from childhood repetition. Your brother followed, his steps slower, his eyes fixed more on the water than on his footing. When he reached the largest stone at the center of the stream, he sat down without speaking. You joined him, stretching your legs out, letting your feet dangle just above the surface. The The silence between you felt like a blanket now, not heavy, not pressing, just warm, familiar. After a while, he spoke. His voice was low, thoughtful, as though he was speaking more to the stream than to you. He said he had dreams sometimes, not of great things, but of simple ones. Of waking up without an ache. Of walking into the morning without the dull weight already pulling down his spine. Of breathing without planning the next step, the next chore, the next scraped knuckle or calloused palm. You didn't interrupt, you let the words come like the water, software, persistent. He said he didn't want to leave, not really. He knew this land, knew the way the trees leaned in spring, and how the soil changed when the worms came close to the surface. But sometimes, especially in the middle of the night when sleep wouldn't come, he wondered what it would be like to live without bending so low to the ground. To live somewhere where people didn't always carry their work on their bodies like armor. You understood. You had wondered too, not often, but enough to know that those thoughts came not from discontent, but from the simple wish to breathe a little easier. You reached into your satchel and passed him a piece of the bread your mother had packed. It was dense, rough at the edges, but it held warmth from your body. He took it, breaking it slowly in half, and shared it back with you. Neither of you said thank you. You didn't need to. The gesture itself was the thanks. You both chewed in silence, the sound of birdsong and rushing water filling the space where words would have sat. You talked then, not about work or worry, but about things you hadn't said aloud in years. The time he caught a fish with his bare hands, and you both swore never to tell. The old wooden flute that disappeared one winter, and how he'd blamed the goat just to get out of a beating. The time you both raced to the mill on a dare, and ended up with blisters so bad you could barely walk for days. You laughed, not loudly, but fully, and the sound surprised you. It didn't echo, it settled. The sun shifted again, casting long shadows over the water. Your brother stood and stretched, groaning in that familiar way that said his joints didn't bend like they used to, though he was still far from old. He looked down at the stream one last time, then glanced back toward the path. You both knew the moment couldn't last forever, but it had lasted long enough to be carried with you. On the way back, the silence returned, but it had changed. It was no longer filled with questions or shadows. It was the quiet that comes after something has been said and heard, after something heavy has been set down, even if just for a moment. You didn't walk quickly. There was no rush. The sun would still be waiting to dip beneath the hills, and the tools would still be leaning against the wall when you returned. When you stepped through the door of the cottage, your mother looked up from the hearth, her eyes moving from your face to your brother's, and back again. She didn't ask anything, just handed each of you a cup of broth and returned to her stitching. Your sister looked up too, her lips pressing into the faintest smile, as if she'd been waiting to see if something had changed. Maybe she saw it in the way you passed your brother the last bit of bread from your sleeve. Or maybe she heard it in the way your father grunted his greeting when he came in a moment later, not harsh, but softened with something like ease. That night, as you lay down, the soreness in your legs returned in full, but it didn't seem to matter as much. Your hands still bore the grime of the day, and your nails were still rimmed with dirt, but your heart felt steadier. You turned on your side and listened for your brother's breath. It came slower now, deeper. And as your own eyes closed, you thought of the stream, the moss, the bend in the trail, and how, even in a life shaped by labor, there could still be moments when you remembered how to be more than tired. You could be quiet. You could be still. The days that followed the walk to the stream passed differently. Not faster, not easier, but with a new kind of rhythm, as though something had clicked back into place that had been off for a while. You could feel it in the way your brother moved beside you in the fields, how he no longer lagged behind but matched your pace, not rushing, just walking alongside again. The silence between you remained, but it no longer felt like something waiting to be broken. It simply belonged there, like the wind or the birdsong or the distant creak of the trees bending under their own weight. The land was changing too. It had been quiet about it, modest even, but now the signs could no longer be missed. The frost no longer clung to the thatch in the mornings, and the mud that used to suck at your boots had begun to firm up under the warming sun. Thin green shoots were pushing through the dark earth, soft and stubborn, promising life where before there had only been cold and clumps of decay. You began your mornings earlier now, not out of duty alone, but because you wanted to be part of that change. You wanted your hands to be there when the world turned its face toward growth again. One morning, your mother sent you out with a basket of seeds tied at your hip and a quiet nod that said she trusted you. The trust wasn't new, but the way she gave it felt different. You crossed the yard where the chickens stirred and the geese honked half-heartedly, then made your way to the plots that had been resting through the long, dark months. Your brother was already there, sleeves rolled, a handful of tools laid out neatly beside him. He looked up as you approached, not with a smile, not exactly, but with a softness that felt close to one. You set your basket down beside him and the two of you got to work. The planting came with a different kind of ache than tilling. It was smaller, more intricate. Your fingers grew sore from the repetition, the careful pressing of each seed into the soil, the pinching of earth to cover them again, the constant crouch and stand, crouch and stand. But you liked the rhythm of it. There was something deeply human in planting, something that made your chest feel less hollow even if your belly still growled and your knees ached. You were doing more than surviving on someone else's land. You were putting something into it. You were leaving behind a trace. The sun was high before either of you paused. Your brother handed you a flask of water and you drank in long gulps, the warmth of it catching you by surprise. He wiped his brow with his sleeve and leaned back against the boundary wall, watching the field stretch out with its neat, uneven rows like some kind of quiet poem. Only the two of you understood. He didn't speak. He just sat, breathing, his boots dusty, his hands blackened at the knuckles. You sat beside him and together you looked over what you had done. It wasn't much, not to someone else, but to you it was everything. That evening when you returned home, your sister was cooking something new, wild greens gathered from near the stream, stirred into a broth with bits of barley and onion. It smelled sharp and clean, like spring itself had found its way into the pot. Your mother hummed softly while she stirred, and your father's voice, low and even, rumbled beneath it as he spoke to her about the day's tasks. The warmth in the room wasn't just from the fire. It came from the way everyone moved a little closer to each other without needing to ask. When the meal was finished and the bowls were rinsed and dried, you lay down with the fire still crackling low, its light dancing over the ceiling beams. Your back ached, but in the way a worn tool aches after a good day's use. The air carried the scent of soil and smoke and wild onions, and your brother's breathing, steady and deep, echoed faintly beside you. You let your eyes close slowly, your body sinking into the mat, and for the first time in what felt like months, your mind did not race ahead to the next task or the next pain. It simply rested there beneath the turned earth and the soft hum of new life beginning again. The morning came on slowly, in the way spring mornings do when the world is just beginning to remember warmth. The first light crept in through the narrow window slit, gentle and golden, touching the rafters like a secret. You stirred before the others, not with a start, but with the soft pull of habit. Your body ached in familiar places, but there was something different in the ache now. It wasn't just burden, it was use. You could feel yesterday's planting still in your legs, in your shoulders, in your fingers that had pressed each seed with care into the cool brown earth. You rose quietly, careful not to wake your brother. His arm was draped across his face, the fire's glow catching in the curls that never seemed to lie flat. His breath was slow and deep, the kind of sleep that only comes when the body has been completely emptied of tension. You stepped past him, pulled on your boots and made your way outside. The air was soft, still holding the edge of the night's chill, but it no longer bit at your skin. Instead, it carried the scent of damp earth, fresh grass and wood smoke rising faintly from other cottages across the village. You crossed the yard to check the small plot nearest the cottage, where your mother had started her herbs. Tiny green fingers had begun pushing up from the ground, still curled at the tips, still uncertain, but alive. You crouched and touched the soil lightly. It gave beneath your fingertips. The frost was truly gone now. What lay ahead would be hard, but not as hard as what lay behind. By the time your brother joined you, the sun had risen enough to turn the field golden at the edges. He stretched with a wince, then gave a quiet laugh under his breath as he rubbed at his lower back. You didn't need to ask how he was. You both knew the weight of work was there, but it sat easier between you now. He knelt beside you and began pulling tools from the sack you'd left near the boundary wall the day before. His hands moved with more certainty, as if the land itself had reminded him of its rhythm and he'd remembered how to move to it. Together you worked the rows again, moving steadily down the line. The seeds were different today, lighter and smaller, carried in a pouch at your side that rustled softly with every step. The planting was meditative, almost like prayer. Each motion required just enough thought to keep your mind from wandering, but not so much that you couldn't drift in and out of your own thoughts. You found yourself thinking about your father's hands, how they looked when he cleaned his tools, how the creases on his palms seemed to tell their own story. You thought about your sister's voice when she sang to the goats, half in tune and half in jest, the animals staring at her as if they understood. And you thought about your mother's eyes when she looked out the window, not watching anything in particular, just resting on the day as it passed. At midday, your brother handed you a piece of dried apple, saved from the last of the winter stores. It was tough and wrinkled, but sweet in the mouth, and for a moment you closed your eyes just to taste it properly. You sat with your backs against the low stone ridge that marked the end of the plot, watching clouds stretch lazily across the sky. Neither of you spoke for a while. The silence was full again, but in a different way than before. It brimmed with shared labor, with the weight of work done together, and the soft pride that came with knowing a job was done as well as it could be. Later that afternoon, as the light dipped and the shadows grew longer, you finished the last row. You stood slowly, your joints stiff and your hands dark with soil, and looked over the field. It was quiet, but it was no longer bare. Each furrow carried the promise of something, not a miracle, not a gift, but something you had given effort to. You knew it wouldn't all take. That was never the way of it. Some seeds would vanish beneath the soil, lost to the damp, to the crows to rot. But some would come up. Some always did. Walking back home, your legs were heavy but not dragging. You passed by the edge of the wood where the nettles had begun to rise again, tall and brave. You thought about cutting some for supper, but decided against it. Another day, there would be time. At the cottage, smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the faint sound of laughter reached your ears. Your sister again, probably teasing your mother or singing some foolish rhyme she'd heard from the village. Inside, the fire welcomed you, and the stew on the hearth filled the room with the scent of leeks and something peppery. Your father sat sharpening a blade, and he gave you a small nod as you entered. No words. Just a nod that meant he'd seen the field, that he knew the work was done. That night, when you finally lay down and closed your eyes, your body hummed with fatigue, but your heart did not resist the dark. You fell into sleep easily, as the fire sighed low, and your brother turned once beside you, murmuring something you couldn't quite catch. The field was planted, the earth had been kind enough to accept your offering. And in that quiet, simple truth, you rested. The days that followed moved slowly, but not the kind of slow that dragged its feet or dulled your senses. It was the quiet, steady kind of slow that settled into your bones and made everything around you feel heavier and more rooted. You woke each morning with the same ache in your back, the same soreness in your fingers, but also with a kind of calm that had been missing during the long, dark months. The fields were planted now, the earth had been given what it needed. What came next was waiting, and waiting carried its own weight. The soil outside your cottage still clung to your boots each time you crossed the yard, but it no longer swallowed your steps. The ground had firmed with the warming air, and each day the wind carried the scent of something new. Sometimes the musk of damp leaves, sometimes the sweetness of nearby blossoms, sometimes just the clean breath of sunlight after a night of rain. It wasn't much, but after the endless grey of winter, even a slight shift in scent or colour felt like a blessing. You still worked, of course. The work never stopped. There were tools to mend, fences to check, animals to feed, roofs to patch, and hands to lend where needed. But there was a different energy to it now. Without the urgency of planting, you could take more time with each task. You could stand up straight between chores and roll your shoulders without rushing. You could run your fingers over the grain of a repaired handle and feel the smoothness of your own effort without immediately moving on to the next demand. Your brother had taken to rising early again before the rest of the house stirred. You'd find him sometimes near the edge of the plot, standing with his arms crossed, his face turned to the east, where the sun pushed up slow and steady over the treetops. He didn't speak when you approached. He didn't need to. You would join him there for a few minutes before the morning work began, just watching the light shift and the mist lift off the field in soft ribbons. There was something holy in that silence, something that reminded you both of the fire you'd once sat beside, of the trail you'd walked together, of the way the land responded not just to touch, but to presence. Your mother, too, seemed to move with a different rhythm now. She hummed more when she cooked. She let your sister take over the stirring and the kneading without correcting every motion. Once, you saw her step out of the house during the day just to feel the sun on her face. She stood there for a full minute, hands on her hips, eyes closed, letting the light warm her cheeks. You watched from a distance and smiled. It had been a long winter for her too, though she'd never said it. Her silence was stitched into every hem she'd mended, every loaf she'd shaped, every pot she'd cleaned, with water nearly frozen. And now, without saying a word, she was letting the season soften her. In the evenings, the family gathered more closely, not because of the cold, but because it had become a habit that no one wanted to break. The hearth still burned, but now the fire was more companion than necessity. The stew still simmered, but sometimes there were bits of green from the wood's edge, little flavors that tasted of something new. Your sister had taken to singing again while she worked, not for anyone in particular, just for herself. Little snatches of songs she half remembered, lines that trailed off and returned when least expected. You caught your father tapping his boot in time more than once, though he would never admit it. There was still hunger. The food hadn't grown yet, and the stores were thinning. But the difference now was hope. Not the loud kind that shouted of miracles, but the quiet kind that rose from the dirt, slow and shy. Each time you walked past the plot and saw the first green leaves pushing up, your chest filled a little. Not just with pride, but with something more fragile. A belief that what you'd done mattered, that the pain in your knees and the grime under your nails had shaped something that would live. You found new rhythms in the waiting. There was wood to gather now that it dried more easily in the sun. There were tools to sharpen, hinges to check, traps to reset. You took comfort in these tasks, in their shape and order. You didn't mind how your hands cracked from the work, how the dirt seemed permanent beneath your nails. These marks were the language of survival, passed down in blisters and quiet nods, and the unspoken way your father handed you his knife to whet without needing to explain. One afternoon, as you repaired a section of fence near the far edge of the plot, your brother joined you with a bundle of withy rods for binding. You worked side by side, your hands moving with the same rhythm now, not mirroring, but complementing. The fence had been broken since winter, but no one had had the time or strength to fix it. Now, in the space created by waiting, you made something whole again. When it was done, you both stood back and looked at it. Not perfect, not clean, but sturdy. And you felt the same slow pride you'd felt after planting. Not because it was finished, but because it was yours. That night, your dreams were quiet. No floods, no hunger, just the rustle of wind in the trees, the feel of soil between your fingers, the warmth of the fire on your face. You slept deeply, your breath matched by your brother's just beside you. Both of you curled into the stillness of a home that, while not rich, held together with care and calloused hands. There were harder days ahead, there always were. But for now, you were in the waiting season, the season of watching what might grow. And in a life shaped by labor and loss, that was a kind of peace worth resting in. The days continued, one into the next, with the sort of quiet repetition that made it hard to tell a Monday from a Thursday. The land was green now, properly green, but not yet generous. The sprouts had grown into stalks, some weak, some proud, but none yet strong enough to call it a harvest. The promise was there, stretched across the field like a whisper, but that promise had begun to strain under the weight of silence from the sky. It hadn't rained in more than a week, not properly. There had been mist, there had been dew, and once or twice a lazy drizzle that barely touched the topsoil before vanishing again. But what the plants needed, what you all needed, was a good, honest rain. The kind that filled the water barrels in half an hour and softened the paths so that even your boots felt grateful for the cushion. Each morning, you woke with a little more hope in your chest than you'd admit out loud. You opened the door before anyone else stirred, before your father coughed or your sister mumbled in her sleep. You stepped outside and tilted your face to the sky, eyes squinting at the cloud cover. Most mornings, it wasn't there. Just the same clear blue or a pale grey that looked soft but never gave. One morning, the clouds rolled low and thick, and you felt your heart rise with them. But they moved on without dropping a thing, slipping over the hills like ghosts too busy to stop. The soil began to harden again beneath your boots. Not like winter, not frozen, but resistant. You could feel the difference through the soles of your shoes. You could see it in the way the young plants leaned, reaching a little more desperately each day. The color changed too, just slightly. What had been a rich green softened into something duller, dustier, as if the field itself were trying not to show its worry. You and your brother checked the rows more often now, each time trying to pretend you saw more growth than you really did. You patted the earth around the roots, whispered encouragements when no one was listening, even poured what little water you could spare from the household barrel when your mother wasn't looking. But it wasn't enough. You knew it. The land knew it. Around the village, the talk shifted. Not panicked, not yet, but quieter, more careful. People asked after the weather the way they might ask after an ill relative, their voices soft, their eyes downcast. A few old men sat outside the mill and muttered about the signs they had seen. A bird that had nested too high, a breeze that didn't come when it should have. Your father didn't comment, but you saw the way he counted the remaining sacks in the corner of the storehouse, his lips moving silently as he did the math. Your mother cooked with less each night, stretching things just enough that the absence didn't shout. But you noticed, you all did. Despite that, the work didn't stop. There was always something to do, a broken yoke to fix, a patch of roof to seal before the thatch gave way, a few sick chickens to tend, their eyes cloudy, their feathers dull. You moved through the days with the same slow persistence you always had, but now there was a shadow following you, not heavy, but constant. It walked beside you in the furrows, it stood behind you while you chopped, kindling. It curled up at your feet at night, silent and waiting. Your brother grew quieter again, not withdrawn, but inward. He spoke when he needed to, worked when asked, but his eyes often wandered. You caught him once, staring at the clouds like they owed him something. Maybe they did. Maybe they owed all of you a little grace. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, he stayed outside. You watched him from the doorway, a dark figure against a sky that showed no signs of mercy. He stood there with his hands in his pockets and his chin tilted upward, unmoving, as if he believed that if he stayed still long enough, the rain would come to him first. You didn't join him. You let him have that moment. Some things were too quiet to share. When you lay down later, the night felt heavier. The air was thick, the fire stubborn. The usual comfort of the mat beneath you wasn't enough to ease the tension in your limbs. You closed your eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. Your thoughts kept turning to the field, to the roots, to the young leaves still trying their best under a sky that refused to help. And yet, even then, even in that unease, you knew you would rise tomorrow and try again. Because that's what you did. That's what everyone did. You worked the land and you waited. You held hope, like water in your cupped hands, knowing it might spill through your fingers at any moment, but never daring to stop trying to carry it. And so, as the house grew quiet and the moon slid across the beams above you, you let your breath slow. You listened to your brother's breathing from across the room. You heard the soft creak of the timbers, the whisper of wind outside, the steady silence of waiting. And you let yourself rest, not because things were certain, but because you had to. The morning would come, and with it, another sky to look up at. It happened in the early morning, before the sun had broken fully across the sky. You'd risen out of habit, legs stiff, eyes still blurred from sleep, and stepped out into the cool quiet of the yard, expecting to find the same clear sky overhead. Instead, you felt it before you saw it, a faint kiss of moisture on your cheeks. Not enough to call it rain, not yet, but enough to still your breath. You stood still, heart catching in your throat, and looked upward. The sky was soft and low, clouded in layers that moved slowly, the color of sheep's wool soaked in dusk. Then, with a hush so subtle it might have been imagined, the drops began to thicken, the first real rain in weeks. Not a storm, not a downpour, but a quiet, steady fall. You didn't shout, didn't run to tell the others. You simply stood there, letting the water find your skin. It was cold, but not sharp. It didn't sting, it soothed. It felt like the land itself exhaling, and you could almost hear the roots whispering beneath the soil, stretching, waking, drinking. When your brother stepped outside a moment later, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he saw you standing in it and didn't ask a thing. He just joined you. You both stood there, still and bareheaded, as the rain gathered strength and rhythm. Inside, the others stirred, drawn by the change in air, the sudden hush of the world wrapped in water. Your mother was first to the door, her apron still tied from yesterday's tasks, her eyes wide and searching. She saw the rain and didn't speak. Just reached out her hand and caught a drop in her palm, holding it like a fragile thing. Then your father came, then your sister, and the five of you stood in a row, not undercover, not rushing for chores, but simply watching the sky break open and offer what it had withheld. The field looked different already. The dust was darkening, the leaves lifting. You knew better than to think one rain could fix everything, but this was enough. This was what you had been waiting for. The promise had been answered, at least in part. You could feel it in the smell of wet earth rising around you, rich and thick and alive. You could feel it in the silence that filled the yard, not heavy like before, but full. The kind of silence that comes after a long, uncertain wait and the soft return of what you had nearly given up on. You stayed out longer than necessary, long enough for your hair to dampen,
long enough for the cold to seep through your sleeves, but still, you didn't move. You wanted to hold on to this moment, because tomorrow the work would resume with more urgency. Tomorrow the tools would come out again and the chores would double. But today, in this stillness, the land had said yes, not loudly, not permanently, but clearly enough to carry you forward. And when you did finally step back inside, your clothes clinging and your boots leaving dark prints on the floor, the fire was already burning and the smell of porridge was thick in the air. Your sister laughed as she passed you a towel, and your father grunted something about wet floors, but the edges of his mouth curled with the first real smile you'd seen from him in days. You dried your hands and sat beside the hearth, the warmth soaking into your skin, your heart beating a little slower now. The rain tapped softly on the roof, steady and sure, and you leaned your head back, eyes half closed, body beginning to drift. The waiting was over, at least for now, and in that simple grace, you let yourself begin to rest. The rain lasted into the afternoon, soaking the roof that creaked gently overhead and drawing a low steam from the fields as the earth drank its fill. You didn't go out that day, not for long. Just enough to check that the plot was holding, that the channels your father had dug along the edges hadn't overflowed. They hadn't. The soil had taken the water in like a long-lost friend, grateful, not greedy. The rows held their shape. The young shoots stood a little taller, glistening in the soft light that sometimes filtered through the veil of clouds. Even the air smelled different, warmer, deeper, as though it carried something from the sky and the soil both. Inside the cottage, the rhythm of the day slowed. Your mother's hands moved calmly from one task to another, not rushing the way she sometimes did when daylight was thin and chores were many. She stirred the stew pot with easy circles, humming something low and familiar, the tune drifting gently through the air like a story too old to name. Your sister sat near the window, stitching a torn sleeve in slow, thoughtful passes, her fingers nimble, her eyes steady. She had taken to singing under her breath again, half-formed melodies that never quite reached their end, and no one minded. Your father had taken the time to sort the tools, laying each one on the table in turn, checking for cracks in the wood and dull edges on the blades. You sat nearby, polishing the smaller things, wiping the grime from metal and smoothing the handles with oil your mother had pressed from old nuts before the stores ran low. The cottage smelled like damp wool and wood smoke and garlic simmering in broth. It smelled like use and rest and something a little like peace. You caught yourself watching the fire as you worked, the way the light flickered along the stone, the way the shadows danced without urgency. Your brother dozed with
his back against the wall, one arm folded behind his head, his mouth slack in a way you'd only ever seen when he was truly tired and unafraid. You let him sleep. He'd earned it. Later, when the rain eased into a fine mist, your father nodded toward the door, and the two of you stepped outside. You didn't speak, you just walked the edge of the field together, checking the runoff, feeling the air. The mud clung to your boots, but not too heavily. The ground had taken the water in without drowning, and that was all you could have hoped for. When you reached the far corner of the plot where the fence leaned just slightly and the nettles brushed against the posts, he stopped and put his hand on the wood. Not for any reason, really. Just a touch, a gesture that said, "This too has held." He looked at you then, eyes squinting against the light, and he gave a small nod, that was all. But it was enough. As the sky darkened and the mist thickened into fog, you made your way back to the warmth. The door opened before you touched it. Your mother's silhouette stood in the glow, her apron dusted with flour, her hair pulled back with a strip of old linen that had once belonged to your grandmother. She smiled, just a little, and stepped aside so you could enter. Supper was hot and filling, not fancy, but good. You ate slowly, savoring every bite, and when the bowls were empty, you stayed at the table, hands wrapped around your cup, letting the warmth soak in. No one rushed to clear things away. There was no need. Time, for once, was not something being chased. It was simply passing, like the wind outside the shutters, like the water slowly sinking into the ground. That night, the fire burned longer than usual. No one said it aloud, but you all seemed to feel it. The need to hold on to this evening just a little more tightly. The comfort of a day well lived. The silence that came not from exhaustion, but from a kind of shared understanding. You leaned back against the wall, your limbs heavy but content, and let your gaze drift. The cottage flickered in golden shadow, a slow dance of stillness and glow. Your brother stirred beside you, shifting in his sleep. Your sister set down her needle and curled beside the hearth. Your parents sat close, speaking in low voices, their hands brushing once, twice, as they passed the ladle between them. And as your eyes began to close, as your breath matched the soft rhythm of the falling rain and the crackle of the fire, you felt the weight of the day lift from your chest. Not gone, never gone, but shared, carried, made lighter by the hands that had touched the same tools, walked the same rows, watched the same sky. You slept not because there was nothing left to do, but because what had been done was enough. For now, good night. Let the rain fall, let the fire fade. You are home, And you are still here,